Certainty in who you are is one of the most magnetic qualities a person can possess. It's not loud, it's not boastful, and it doesn't need to demand attention because it already has it. When you carry yourself with certainty, you signal something powerful, that you are complete within yourself, not waiting to be defined by someone else, or not hoping to be chosen so you can feel worthy, but already knowing, already standing in that truth without flinching. And this is the energy that men remember. This is what draws them back long after the conversation has ended or the silence is settled. Certainty doesn't come from proving something. It doesn't come from fighting to be seen. It comes from deep inner knowing your value, your intentions, your boundaries, and your emotional world. When a woman knows who she is, she walks into any room differently. She speaks with intention, not desperation. She listens more than she explains. And she doesn't seek validation from someone who hasn't earned the right to influence her sense of self. That level of groundedness is rare, and anything rare becomes unforgettable. Men are instinctively drawn to what feels solid, or they may not be able to articulate it, but they feel it. When a woman is certain about who she is, there's nothing to manage, fix, or decode. Her energy communicates, "This is who I am. I welcome connection, but I do not chase it. I give love, but I never beg for it. I am kind, but I am not weak." That balance, softness, and strength woven together is what lingers in a man's mind long after she walks away. Certainty isn't the same as perfection. You don't need to have every detail of your life figured out. It's not about flawless execution. It's about self-trust. Even in uncertainty, even in heartbreak, even when you're not sure what's coming next, you still know that you are whole. You don't panic when someone pulls away, or you don't unravel when a man doesn't respond the way you hoped, because your worth was never tied to his behavior in the first place. That level of emotional independence is rare, and it's powerful. When a woman shows up like this, she creates a contrast. She's not chaotic. She's not reactive. She doesn't twist herself into someone else's expectations. And that kind of presence stands out, especially in a world where so many are trying to perform, prove, or please. She simply is. And that isness, that unapologetic presence, becomes etched into memory. Men don't forget that kind of energy because they don't encounter it often. It's easy to think that in order to be loved or wanted, you have to mold yourself, that you have to keep up, keep giving, keep showing more to stay in someone's mind. But the truth is, the most magnetic version of you is the one who's not performing at all. The one who is aligned, self-respecting, and unafraid to stand alone if she must. That's the woman men return to, not because she begged, not because she convinced them, but because her energy did something their mind couldn't explain. It awakens something deeper, and they want to feel it again. Certainty doesn't just attract, it anchors. It brings stability into dynamic, uncertain spaces. When everything else feels unpredictable, the one who remains sure of herself becomes the calm in the storm, and we're all drawn to that calm, especially those who don't even know they're looking for it. Men return not just to a woman, but to a feeling. And when that feeling is rooted in certainty, unshaken, unwavering, unbothered, that return becomes not only likely, but inevitable. There's something quietly captivating about someone who knows how to handle their emotions without making them everyone else's problem. Emotional maturity is not about suppression. It's about self-possession. It's about the ability to feel deeply without becoming unstable. When you can experience anger, sadness, disappointment, or longing without lashing out, without collapsing, without trying to manipulate the moment, you embody a rare strength that leaves a lasting impression. Men don't return to chaos, they return to peace, especially the kind of peace that doesn't compromise its truth. Emotional maturity isn't about denying how you feel. It's about understanding what those feelings mean, where they come from, and how to respond to them without losing control. A woman who understands this doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't spiral when someone pulls away. She notices what's happening, honors how she feels, but she doesn't let emotion hijack her integrity. That steadiness, the ability to hold space for your own heart while still choosing how you engage, is a magnetic force. It draws others in, not because it asks for anything, but because it offers something rare, safety. Men remember the woman who made them feel seen, yet never demanded to be saved. The one who didn't explode or collapse, but remained steady, aware, and wise. This kind of maturity isn't born overnight. It comes from self-reflection, from learning not to let wounds speak louder than wisdom. And once you own it, it becomes part of your presence. You walk into conversations with less fear, more clarity. You stop asking, how do I keep him? And start asking, does this align with my peace? That shift is everything. Emotional maturity isn't glamorous, but it's unforgettable. It changes the dynamic of every interaction. It leaves a man wondering why the connection felt so different, and why it keeps echoing in his mind long after he thought he'd moved on. True detachment is not about being cold or distant, it's about being whole. It means that while you may desire love, you do not need it to validate your worth. That distinction is powerful. A woman who is detached in this way doesn't chase, doesn't plead, doesn't shrink herself to fit into someone else's world. She holds her own space and trusts that what is meant for her will not require her to abandon herself. That energy is captivating. It creates contrast in a world full of desperate grabbing. She is at peace with letting go. Men return to women who don't cling. Why? Because that kind of detachment feels different. It's not rejection, it's reverence for self. It's the quiet message, I choose you, but I do not need you to choose me in order for me to feel whole. That calm, self-assured posture is rare. It shifts the entire dynamic. Suddenly, the man is not being pursued. He's being invited. And that invitation feels sacred, not desperate. It creates a space where respect can grow, where curiosity remains alive, where attraction isn't killed by emotional dependency. Detachment is often misunderstood. People think it means shutting down or pretending not to care. But true detachment is full of care, just not obsession. It's having the courage to love with an open hand, to give without controlling, to walk away if necessary, not because you stopped feeling, but because you started honoring yourself. That kind of power doesn't scream, it resonates. It's the kind of presence that lingers in a man's memory, not because she needed him, but because she didn't. And yet she still loved with clarity and intention. In that balance between openness and independence, a man senses something real, something grounded, something rare. And in time, he finds himself thinking about that energy again, missing it, wanting to return to it, not because he was pushed, but because he was pulled silently, powerfully, inevitably. There is an undeniable power in a woman who has standards and refuses to apologize for them. Standards are not ultimatums. They are not threats or manipulation tactics. They are a declaration of self-respect. They say, this is the level at which I operate. If you want access to me, it requires presence, effort, and integrity. And that is exactly why they're so powerful. Because a woman with standards doesn't need to convince anyone of her worth. She already lives in alignment with it. She doesn't lower the bar just to keep someone interested. She understands that anything gained through compromise of self will eventually cost her more than it's worth. Men remember the woman who had standards, not the kind that were performative or used to punish, but the kind that were quiet, unwavering, and consistent. She didn't lecture him about what he needed to be. She simply lived by her values, and either he rose to meet her or he faded out of relevance. That's the effect of true self-worth. It does not chase or force, it attracts and filters. And men are drawn back to that, not just because it's rare, but because it creates challenge and clarity. There's no confusion around what she expects, because her life already reflects it. When you embody your standards, you're not trying to test someone. You're showing them what you tolerate by what you allow. And what you don't allow speaks even louder. It says you are not afraid to be alone. You are not waiting for someone to complete you. You are already whole. And that energy creates a gravitational pull. Men often find themselves returning to the woman who didn't break herself into smaller pieces just to fit their comfort zone. They return because her presence invited them to grow, to elevate, and to become more, not for her approval, but for their own evolution. That is what standards do. They don't just protect your peace, they challenge others to meet you where you truly stand. There is a quiet allure and mystery, an energy that doesn't explain itself, doesn't overshare, and doesn't seek to be fully understood by everyone. It's not about playing games or withholding truth. It's about depth. It's about having layers that are revealed slowly, with time and trust. A woman who carries mystery is not performing. She's simply not broadcasting her entire soul to every passing interest. And that makes her unforgettable. Because when you can't fully define something, it stays alive in your mind. It pulls you back in, searching, wondering, wanting to experience it again. In a world addicted to oversharing and instant validation, mystery becomes magnetic. It creates a pause, a curiosity, a sense of intrigue that lingers. Men return to the woman who made them feel something they couldn't quite name. The one who didn't tell her whole story in the first hour. The one who listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, said things that carried weight. That's the kind of presence that doesn't get lost in the noise. It stands apart from it. It's not aloofness, it's self-containment. It's knowing that you don't need to reveal every emotion, every fear, every wound to feel connected. Mystery isn't manipulation, it's presence without full disclosure. It's emotional discipline wrapped in grace. It invites without demanding. It offers without surrendering everything. And that energy, controlled, elegant, elusive, can haunt a man's thoughts long after she's gone. Not because she made him guess, but because she let him discover, bit by bit. That process of discovery is what keeps him engaged. It builds anticipation, it earns respect, and most of all, it leaves a mark. Men don't forget the woman who left something to the imagination, not in a superficial way, but in a soulful one. When you own your mystery, you protect your inner world. You create a sacred space that only the worthy can enter. And when a man senses that, when he realizes not everyone gets access to your depth, he knows the connection he felt wasn't ordinary. And if he ever walks away, it's often only to realize what he's lost and to hope for the chance to return. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes the most commanding presence is the one that speaks softly but carries absolute certainty. A woman who knows how to communicate with calm intensity doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her tone is steady. Her words are intentional. Her silence, even more powerful than her speech, carries the weight of someone who doesn't seek to dominate but never allows herself to be dismissed. And this is the kind of presence that lingers long after the conversation ends. There's something disarming about someone who stays composed in moments that would make others unravel. It's not about hiding emotion. It's about being in control of it. When she speaks, she isn't trying to overpower or outwit. She's offering clarity, not chaos, truth, not noise. And that truth, when delivered without desperation or drama, hits different. It bypasses defenses. It leaves no room for confusion. Men remember the woman who didn't scream to make a point, the one who could say everything she needed with just a few words and mean every one of them. This kind of communication signals a deeper authority, the authority you have over yourself. When you know your worth, you don't argue endlessly for it. When you're confident in your boundaries, you don't threaten. You simply walk away when they're crossed. The calm voice doesn't come from fear, it comes from strength. And that strength creates a lasting impression. Men may be used to volume, but they return to the woman whose presence could fill a room without ever needing to raise the tone. Command is not about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. That self-command is what earns respect. It's what makes people listen when you speak, and it's what makes your silence even louder. In that silence, a man hears everything. Your dignity, your confidence, your refusal to settle for anything less than what you know you deserve. That's not just powerful, it's unforgettable. Letting go is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. The world teaches us to hold on, to fight, to prove our worth by how hard we cling. But the deepest strength lies in surrendering with grace. Not out of weakness, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. A woman who can let go without bitterness, without drama, without chasing is a woman who commands respect, not through control, but through trust. Trust in herself, trust in timing, trust in what's meant to stay. Men don't forget the woman who let them go with dignity. The one who didn't try to force connection, who didn't beg for closure, who didn't lose herself in the grief of what could have been. Instead, she stood in her truth and released what was no longer aligned. That kind of grace leaves a mark. It speaks louder than any final plea. It says, I choose peace over possession. I choose self-respect over fear. I choose myself over your uncertainty. And that choice creates a space men often find themselves wanting to return to, because it was never suffocating, it was never desperate. It was love without conditions and boundaries without apology. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you cared enough not to lose yourself in the process. It's an act of courage to release something you wanted to keep simply because it no longer reflects your value. And in that act, you remind the world and yourself of what you deserve. That reminder echoes, especially in the minds of those who once had access to you. Because the quiet strength of someone who lets go with grace stays imprinted even more than the loudest heartbreak. There's a reason people return to what they couldn't control, what they couldn't quite hold on to, but also couldn't forget. When you let go, you're not pushing anyone away, you're allowing what's true to unfold. And sometimes that letting go is the very thing that brings someone back. Not out of guilt or pressure, but because they finally realize the value of what they lost. Self-respect isn't something you announce, it's something you embody. It radiates through how you speak, how you move, and how you respond when you're tested. It's not in the words you use to explain your boundaries, it's in your unwillingness to compromise them. A woman with self-respect doesn't just set expectations. She becomes the standard. She isn't aggressive about what she deserves, but she never stays in places where she's undervalued. And that energy, that quiet confidence, it stays with people. It lingers. Men especially remember the woman who didn't just demand respect, but made it the atmosphere she lived in. This kind of presence can't be faked. It comes from deep inner work, from knowing who you are and what you will not tolerate, no matter how lonely the road might get. Self-respect isn't about punishing others for falling short. It's about refusing to punish yourself by accepting less. And that discipline, that alignment, creates an aura. People feel it before you speak. They sense that you don't bend for approval. You don't tolerate crumbs, or you don't need to be chased. But you also won't stand still for someone who's inconsistent. Men are drawn to this kind of woman, not because she's trying to impress them, but because her energy calls them higher. She's not impressed by potential. She watches for action, or she doesn't argue with red flags. She quietly exits. And that silence, that absence becomes louder than any words she could say. Self-respect doesn't scream, it shines. And when a man loses a woman who walked in that light, he doesn't just miss her. He misses who he had to become to be in her presence. It's easy to be liked when you're agreeable. But self-respect isn't about being liked. It's about being true to yourself, even when it costs you attention or affection. That kind of woman becomes unforgettable, not because she tried to be, but because she refused to be anything less than whole. There's nothing more compelling than a woman who continues to grow, regardless of who stays or leaves. She doesn't pause her evolution waiting for someone to catch up. She doesn't shrink herself to keep a connection comfortable. Her life moves forward always. And that momentum, that commitment to becoming more is magnetic. Men remember the woman who didn't wait to be chosen before she chose herself, who didn't need permission to rise, who kept building her life not to prove anything, but because she knew she was made for more. Growth is powerful because it disrupts complacency. When you continue to develop emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, you become a moving force. And people feel that. You become a mirror, showing others where they're stuck, what they've avoided, how they've settled. And sometimes that reflection is uncomfortable. Some will walk away because they're not ready, but many return, not just because they miss you, but because they realize you became something they didn't expect, a standard, a vision, a reminder of who they could be if they stopped standing still. A growing woman doesn't chase. She's too focused on expansion. She reads, learns, heals, explores. She creates joy on her own terms. Her identity isn't shaped by a relationship status. It's sculpted by her effort and her courage. And that self-made radiance becomes something men crave more than beauty, more than chemistry. Because it doesn't just inspire attraction, it inspires admiration. And admiration doesn't fade as fast as infatuation. It sticks. When you choose growth, you change your energy. You no longer operate from fear, but from vision. And that shift is what creates return. Men come back not just to reconnect, but to rise, because your evolution invited them to do the same. And even if they don't say it, they felt it. They saw what it looked like to become more, and they want to feel that again, by your side or within themselves. That's what growth does. It doesn't wait. But it never truly leaves without leaving something behind. Wholeness is not perfection. It's completeness. It's the inner state of being content with who you are, with or without validation. A woman who walks in wholeness doesn't fill spaces with performance or pretense. She isn't waiting to be rescued. She has made peace with her past, accepted her imperfections, and learned how to meet her own needs without demanding others do it for her. That kind of energy doesn't compete, it doesn't chase, it simply is. And that presence, the grounded, unshakable presence of someone who is already whole, is unforgettable. It's not something a man can replace or replicate, no matter how far he goes or how long he's away. Wholeness is rare because it's hard won. It's the result of choosing healing over bitterness, solitude over codependence, growth over stagnation. It's what happens when a woman stops seeking completion in another person and starts building a life that reflects her truth. When she does that, everything shifts. She no longer reacts to rejection like it defines her. She doesn't internalize neglect. She sees it for what it is, a reflection of the other person's limitations, not her own inadequacy. And that level of emotional sovereignty, that's magnetic. That's the kind of strength that doesn't ask for love, but attracts it effortlessly. Men return to wholeness because it offers what fleeting chemistry can't: depth, stability, and peace. It's not intoxicating in a chaotic way, it's anchoring. It makes them feel more like themselves when they're near her. It's not that she completes them, but that her completeness invites them to remember their own. And that invitation lingers. It stays in their mind because it didn't try to possess them. It simply existed with clarity and warmth and gave them the freedom to choose. When a woman is whole, she doesn't just draw people in. She changes them because she's a living reminder that love isn't supposed to consume you. It's supposed to support who you already are. And if they leave, they'll carry that truth with them. If they return, it's because they finally understood it. Wholeness doesn't beg, it doesn't break, it breathes. And in that breath, there is peace, the kind that keeps calling them back.